I think Hollywood has been engaging in soft UFO disclosure for 30 or 40 years through these CAA liaisons.
We have Spielberg's new movie Disclosure.
It's now called Disclosure. He's super into time travel. And then you have Back to the Future come out, which is a Steven Spielberg executive produced movie. The guy's name is Doc Brown, which everybody called Thomas Townsend Brown. His name is Emmett Brown, E-M-E-T-T Brown. Thomas Townsend Brown is in the name. He uses his flux capacitor. Thomas Townsend Brown's experiments are capacitor experiments. And he goes back in time in 1985, which is the year Thomas Townsend Brown dies.
So we were talking about the ARV and the TR-3B.
Yeah.
And according to Fouché and so forth, that's not the only triangular alien reproduction vehicle that's in kind of UFO lore. There's also, if you reference forensic artists, I've talked about this a few times, Bill McDonald, who's done a lot of work on drawing the Roswell craft. He actually worked with Robert and Ryan Wood to create the two extraterrestrial biological entities mentioned in the Majestic document, the Special Operations Manual. In 1992, McDonald met with two Northrop and two Lockheed engineers who were fed up with the secrecy and classification of their work, who kind of dictated a drawing of a triangular ARV called the XF-131 Super Sentinel that operated off of like RCS, radar cross-section facilities in the Mojave Desert. And I've talked to McDonald about this, and he maintains the secrecy of these engineers to this day. Because I said, hey, can I talk to these people? But that design actually was featured in the first ever episode of the X-Files because Chris
Carr.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah. Contracted Bill McDonald to put that in the
Chris Carr is the creator of the X-Files.
Right. Bill McDonald was contracted to put that in the first ever episode of the X-Files, which was allegedly based on true stories from John D'Souza. And that episode is about a triangular alien reproduction vehicle that's seen over an Air Force base. And it's the same design. I've featured some clips of that. That's so interesting.
I think Hollywood has been engaging in soft UFO disclosure for 30 or 40 years through these CAA liaisons.
We have Spielberg's new movie Disclosure.
It's now called Disclosure. And I was talking to CHRISRAMSAY, again, great YouTube channel. Go follow it, Area 52.
Yeah,
and he was like, what if a UFO is shown as part of that movie? Would that not be the best way to disclose? And like, I'm on his side. Like maybe that happens. And then historically too, you've had, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which involves JACQUESVALLEE and J. Allen Hynek. Jacques is played as a character by Francois Truffaut. You see crates that say Lockheed and Northrop.
No, don't they say
SKUNKWORKS and TRW?
TRW.
They either, if they say that, then you're like, okay, they're talking about next level knowledge. Then they really know.
Because TRW was bought by Northrop in 2002.
Right.
And TRW was the contractor behind the Zodiac story, which was an alleged crash.
So I think they do say SKUNKWORKS, and because Close Encounters of the Third Kind was they do? Okay. I don't know.
Interesting fact about TRW. Yeah. Jacques-Vallée has talked about Dr. Eric A. Walker, we talked about earlier, being on the board of directors or a chairman of TRW as well.
Oh, wow. Fascinating.
I mean, Spielberg was dialed in with, you have to go deep to talk about SKUNKWORKS and TRW in the film.
Yeah. Well, let's look up, at some point, whether it's Lockheed and Northrop.
SKUNKWORKS.
You're sure? Okay.
Yeah, SKUNKWORKS.
Well, that's next level. Then, he knows a lot of knowledge. Also on the Townsend Brown, who I'm sure discovered some interesting effects in the world of gravity. I'm sure of that. I feel very high conviction in that. And I just interviewed Carl Nell, who's the deputy CTO of Northrop Grumman, where I'm saying again that this gravity technology got probably implemented in the B-2 stealth bomber. Yeah. And he's the deputy CTO of Northrop Grumman, and he goes, go watch Jesse's video on Thomas Townsend Brown. When I ask him, is there anything sort of useful or applicable in the UFO story?
Jesse's done a number of podcasts looking into Taylor Townsend Brown and some other very interesting like heretical technologies. So I'd invite people, an unsolicited plug, to check out some of Jesse's podcasts.
So there's more corroboration beyond that on the TT Brown stuff. But where was I going with? What were you just saying? The
TRW, Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Before that,
okay. So Steven Spielberg executive produced Back to the Future.
Yeah.
And the subplot of the whole Thomas Townsend Brown story is that gravity affects time. Mm-hmm. In general relativity, gravity and time are tightly coupled. They're related. And he talks about time travel constantly with his family. Like, that's something that's really, and if you think about it, if we were to ever engage in effective interstellar travel, it would involve space-time metric engineering inherently. You can't get around that. Even with nuclear thermal propulsion, you get to the closest star system in 40,000 years. That's biologically, that does not work, right? So he's super into time travel. And then you have Back to the Future come out, which is a Steven Spielberg executive produced movie. The guy's name is Doc Brown, which everybody called Thomas Townsend Brown. His name is Emmett Brown, EMETT Brown. Thomas Townsend Brown is in the name. He uses his flux capacitor. Thomas Townsend Brown's experiments are capacitor experiments. And he goes back in time in 1985, which is the year Thomas Townsend Brown dies, to 1957, which is when I think his experiment was first experimentally proven around that time at the Bonson Labs. It's the time that physics sort of went astray in the wrong direction, when I think the anti-gravity stuff went black. And so it's just, I don't know, there's so much there that I think begets this like greater. And then E.T. even is extremely interesting. E.T. and the kid they have some sort of weird psionic connection. And you remember they're in the hospital together, and E.T.'s like heart rate is matching the kid's heart rate. And you have all this stuff around the psionic connection that's now coming out. You also have the consciousness connection there, where the mother is walking around the kitchen, and like these kids see the ETs, but the mother doesn't. And like the ET is sort of like walking around the fridge, and the mother doesn't see it because like her perceptive, she's closed off to these realities. So like I think Steven Spielberg definitely has been fed some really interesting UFO stuff over the years.
And was it Spielberg or Cameron that created the film The Abyss?
That was James Cameron.
Okay, because that's also an interesting one about USO.
Totally.
It's interesting to see these concepts relate in Hollywood, because
James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, and Christopher Nolan are definitely fed intense secret shit.
Yeah,
they have to be.
Because on one hand, you have films like Independence Day, which is just a bombastic action film glorified. But then on the other hand, you have very thoughtful projects like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and to an extent E.T. and as we know now.
But even like not even like, where does the concept of Men in Black get to? Men in Black sounds quacky.
Yeah.
But like, if you go talk to Richard Dolan, he's a super deep UFO researcher. Men in Black are they are this thing. They're in these suits, and they show up after UFO abduction experiences, UFO sightings, and they often take people's footage or like, swear them to secrecy. And Dolan thinks they're almost like the counter intel group of the aliens themselves. They'll erase your memory. And so it's turned into this like kind of jokey, funny, movie with Will Smith. But like, even that, like, where is that derived to begin with?
Right.
And it's just it's so fascinating,
That's interesting because I've heard that idea floated around before, that the like colloquial Men in Black are almost like a non-human entity. Because I'd like to hear more about that, because I almost stand on the other side. I straight up think the Men in Black, in a sense, are NSA spooks.
So I would say the same thing, but like, you meet with certain people like Whitley Strieber and other just experiencers, and like, these guys seem to like have technology available to them that's not available to the general public. And maybe that is just like, okay, so it's like Occam's razor, it's like NSA or something, but it's weird technology. It's like implants that involve technological mediumship, as Whitley Strieber. I felt his implant in his ear.
Really?
Yeah, I felt it. And it's the weirdest thing in the world. And he says it moves with his own metabolism. I haven't verified that, but like,
has he ever thought about getting that cut out?
He wants to get it cut out, but he says it moves every time. And I felt the thing, and it's not natural. So unless he's totally grifting and putting the thing in his ear, even though he's not really like making that much money now off of UFOs, and it happened after he wrote Communion, and like it's like, I don't know, man. The whole thing's so strange.
That is interesting. That, perhaps the two are not mutually exclusive, because there's also stories like, have you heard of Treat? It's the supposed Men in Black unit out of the NSA called the Tactical Reconnaissance Engineering Assessment Search Team, which was created by Stubblebine. And it's only ever been talked about by Fouché and Hans Adams, the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein.
So that's come up for me, and I've never brought that up. But well, how do you think that the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, because I've heard some very interesting things about him. He seems like a really cool guy, but like really interested in the spooky science stuff.
I've only ever seen his discussions with like Greer and the emails on the DPI archive, and looked up a few things about him and him mentioning Treat. Besides that, I have no idea, because I would see that and I said, Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, a small Central European company. What have you found out about him? Because that's pretty interesting.
I don't. I don't know. I probably shouldn't say because the conversations I've had are in confidence, but he seems very interesting and interested in sort of secret science. One more piece of possible corroboration of, you know, maybe it being a combo as far as the Men in Black is I did speak to HALPUTHOFF recently, and I was trying to figure out, I was like, is it their program? You know, is it the NHI program or is it our program? And he goes, what if it's a joint space program? He goes, I might believe that. Maybe there's something in where we're in. He did. Yeah. To me.
Jeez.
Yeah. So in HALPUTHOFF is, I think, as deep as it gets when it comes to sort of outside the Overton window science, which is now being vindicated. I mean, he was just on a podcast in December, which was co-sponsored by National Science Foundation.
Yeah.
And like you had like pretty high up DOE people on the podcast and all these amazing people with all pretty impressive credentials. The former head of revolutionary tech at SKUNKWORKS are all on this podcast. And he's talking about extended electrodynamics and gravity manipulation. And I think it's clearly this sort of limited hangout where it's like, let's partially expose some things so that people can, you know, learn a little bit more about some science that we've been sitting on, especially again, if China has caught up. You can't just, you know, throw people off the trail constantly. You need some limited surface area around it. But yeah, HALPUTHOFF did say, and you know, it's always, I love Hal, but it's always this sort of like, you know, tongue in cheek, like half speculating. So you never quite know.
He never commits to something.
He always goes, the whole zoo of possibilities. And I was like, A, B, C, and D. And then you have to decide.